But thank you everyone for joining us tonight to talk about the dark skies of the Sky Island and how those nocturnal environments are important for wildlife, but also how you all can help right at your homes or wherever you happen to be to collect some data on the conditions of the night sky in the Sky Island region. I'm Eamon Harity. I'm the Wildlife Program Manager at Sky Island Alliance. So I work a lot with our border wildlife study, our photofauna programs, and any of the programs that overlap with wildlife, which here at Sky Island are quite a few. So that's me, and I'll pass it off to Sergio to introduce himself.
Mi nombre es Sergio Müller, yo estoy radicando en Hermosillo y soy el encargado de coordinación de conservación en Sky Island Alliance aquí en la parte de mexicano.
Great, thanks Sergio. Emily, do you want to quickly introduce yourself? Emily's manning the shot behind the scenes today, but she is crucially important to all we do at the Sky Island Alliance.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Burns, and it's exciting for me to be here tonight to talk about dark skies and wildlife. It's an issue that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm looking forward to walking outside after today's talk and seeing just how dark it is tonight.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emily. So here we go. A great question to kind of get us started is what do wildlife need to survive and thrive? And I'm sure we've all asked questions like this or thought about this, and some of the early answers come up are habitat, places to move, places to roam, corridors to move between habitats. Of course, we need water. Wildlife needs access to water, access to food, a home, a place to sleep, a place to rest, lack of disturbance. So they need quiet as well, just like us in the mornings or us when we're trying to sleep. A lack of noise is important out there for wildlife to thrive. And something that's not as commonly spoken about or discussed is the need for natural circadian rhythms and natural night conditions. By that, I mean skies that are lit with only the light of the moon and the stars. We've seen these beautiful scenes of our Sky Islands where day fades naturally to night. And for us, it's important to maintain our circadian rhythms and take in just the beauty of the night sky. And for wildlife, a natural transition to skies that are primarily dark is important for a number of reasons. And to illustrate that, I'm going to take us to an area that is near and dear to my heart and all of our hearts here at Sky Island, where we have been running a border wildlife study for more than 2 years. It's between the Patagonia Mountains down near Nogales, crossing through the San Rafael Valley, over to the Huachuca Mountains near Sierra Vista. We have a network of 64, give or take, wildlife cameras that have been running continuously for 2 years, 2+ years, collecting data on the occurrence of species, when and where they occur, and the types of species in this area. And in this area, it's dark. Currently it is unlit with human light, and by that we can see in these photos that is from the same camera where daytime on the top and nighttime in the bottom. Day gives way to a very nice natural and dark scene at night. And you have some cows in the top photo, and on the bottom we have a black-tailed jackrabbit. And this transition from daytime to natural night is important. And if we think about the species we associate with evening and after dark, this is a great collection of those species, right? We have the higher level trophic species like mountain lions and badgers, bobcats, coyotes, gray fox, and the American black bear. These are all species that exist in the Sky Islands, and all species that in some way or another depend on nocturnal environments. And so on this slide and on the next couple slides, we'll see a graph that shows the proportion of detections on the vertical axis. And by that, I mean across all of our cameras, across all years of the study, the ratio or the proportion of photos that occur at night for each species versus those that occur during the day. So for example, if we get 10 photos of an American black bear and 2 occur during the day and 8 occur at night, the proportion of detections would be roughly around 0.8 or 80% of the photos at night. And so keep that in mind as we look through the next couple slides, that these graphs are showing the proportion of detections nocturnally or at night. And we see actually the American black bear is quite crepuscular. It has detections at night, but much fewer than some of the species like gray fox and mountain lion, which are all very nocturnal. These are species that occur almost entirely at night. If you see those 2 species on the far right, almost all of the detections occur in the evening or after sunset. And now if we think of species as prey, or if we move on towards species we think of as prey, like black-tailed and antelope jackrabbit, javelina, whitetail, and mule deer, the pattern is a little different. They all occur at night, but we can see antelope jackrabbit and black-tailed jackrabbit occur almost primarily at night. Black-tailed jackrabbit have almost no detections during the day. Antelope jackrabbit show a little bit more of a propensity to occur during the daylight hours, whereas javelina, mule deer, and white-tailed deer all occur, roughly about half of their detections occur during the nighttime hours, and half of their detections occur during the day. And these patterns reflect just different needs, different ecological niches that are all met with the current night conditions in this area between the Patagonia and the Huachuca Mountains. But that's not necessarily something that will remain in place, as we'll talk about later. But moving on to some more species that are near and dear to our hearts here in the Sky Islands, we have some of our subtropical, or species we think of as Sky Island specialists, or species that occur in few other places. In the US at least, most of their range is further down into Mexico. We have the ringtail species, or ringtailed cat, ringtail, Cacomixtle on the top left. We have the coati, or chulo. We have a Virginia opossum, actually known as the North Mexican Virginia opossum, and the hognose skunk, or zorillo. And these are all species that are really localized and specialty species to our region here in the Sky Island. And we can't forget the hooded skunk, another favorite of ours here at Sky Island. And look at those skunks. They are nearly 100% of their detections are at night. All of the hognose detections we have are nocturnal. Just a very few hooded skunks are nocturnal. Ringtails, we associate them with being a nocturnal species, but we see from this graph that there is a little bit of variation. We do detect some ringtails during the day, but almost all of those detections occur in the early mornings, just after sunset. Virginia opossum are almost also entirely nocturnal. And then, not surprisingly, coati, as we know, are diurnal species, or species that occur during the day. And our detections, our data reflect that, with most, if not all, of the detections occurring during the daylight hours. The exceptions being a few nocturnal movements by solo males, perhaps traveling between habitat patches in search of food resources and or mates. Most of the nocturnal detections from white-nosed coati are with solo males. And now we can ask ourselves, what are species doing at night, and why do they need access to night skies or darkness in the evenings? And some species are out exploring. Raccoons are out searching for food, searching for access to water, and just moving around in search, under the cover of darkness, in search of food and resources. Other species, like bats, this is a fantastic photo by Sergio himself, right here with us today. Other species need darkness to navigate. We have numerous migratory bat species in this area. We have species of insects. We have species of birds that move by moon and starlight. And if you take away a clear view to moon and stars with human lights at night, it can really affect their ability to navigate efficiently, effectively through the landscape. Other species, white-tailed deer, forage at night in search of food. They move around under the cover of darkness, less risk of predation, and they can still access the foods they need. And so if we affect the darkness of the night sky, we can limit the ability of species to access forage effectively and efficiently. Still, other species like this, like moths and glowworms and beetles, seek out mates in the evenings. And what's particularly interesting is species of glowworms advertise their locations with bioluminescence. And if we light up the night sky, they can no longer communicate. Males can't find females for mating opportunities, and it can really affect the reproduction of these species. There's even been cases where the physiology of animals change with increasing light at night. A study in Europe on European blackbirds found that not only does breeding start sooner, but birds change their behaviors, and there's additional stress as nightlight increases. So the effects of light are far-reaching from taxa like insects all the way up to large mammals. Other species like these wood rats occur at night and do so to avoid predation. A lot of predators hunt with their eyes, and small mammals are more difficult to find at night, and they're safer under the cover of darkness. So as we light the night, prey species are more at risk. And finally, there are some species of predators that are adapted to hunt at night, like this barn owl. Fantastic shot of this barn owl. And I might mention that all of these photos are from our wildlife trail cameras out along the border, and they show these species active at night in natural settings. But what happens when humans come into the picture and affect the way light occurs at night? This can be in the form of cities. This is another fantastic photo from Sergio of Hermosillo. Correct me if I'm right. This is of Hermosillo, right, Sergio? Where we build cities, we build developments, and we light them. But this light doesn't necessarily remain directly in those cities. It can spread for miles and miles beyond. And many of us have probably been out and seen a view like this, where there's bright glow in the distance, and it's not the sun setting, it's not the moon rising, it's urban areas or populated areas, and that light affects the horizon. It glows and can reach areas that are otherwise dark, but it can still confuse and affect the ability of species to migrate. Another fantastic shot by Sergio. And Sergio, where is this photo taken?
Esta foto está tomada cerca de Quino. A la derecha se ve una tormenta distante y a la izquierda esa es la luz de Hermosillo.
Bahía Quino, dices.
Sí.
So for our English audience, this photo is from Bahía Quino, and it shows a nighttime scene with the lights from Hermosillo and then also a storm. Just a really fantastic shot. So lights on the landscape have effects on wildlife, as I mentioned, across taxa, from insects to amphibians. There's well-known stories of turtles hatching on the beach, and they're used to navigating towards lights that are over the water as celestial lights, moon and starlights, and urban lights are often on the other direction from open water. So turtles hatch and walk and move in the wrong direction. There's fascinating research out showing that dung beetles can't move effectively when there's urban lights in the horizon, because it affects their ability to locate themselves and to move in directions that they want to. With the presence of urban lighting on the horizon, they move in odd directions, and they just get lost and are inefficient in their movement. So the impacts of light affect not just large mammals, not just insects, but species across all taxa. And so this shot shows the overhead view from space of the lights and the way they spread from urban areas like Tucson in the top left of the screen. You can see the Highway 19 corridor down to Nogales and another urban setting where the light spreads out, and all across to the east to Agua Prieta. And in this map, the darker red colors are associated with more intense nightlight, and the greens and blues are where that nightlight fades away. And that the gray areas between cities and between those spots of green and yellow are actually area where there's not much detectable human light at night. And we see right away the impacts of urban settings, population centers. And this is okay. I mean, people need to live in places, and we are going to have lights at night. There are ways we can minimize this light, but what we're at Sky Island are a little bit worried about is new light that we see as unnecessarily and particularly harmful. And this is down along the international border. So the physical barrier, the pedestrian barrier we're familiar with, has been built, and more than 60% of the US-Arizona border has a physical wall. But what's less talked about is that for much of this wall, there is lighting in place. In urban areas such as Naco, Douglas, and Nogales, these lights are turned on at night. But in areas like the San Rafael Valley or east of Douglas towards the San Bernardino Valley, the lights are in place but not turned on. And this is something we want to avoid. We want to avoid them turning on these lights. And I'm going to demonstrate in the next slide one of the reasons why we want to keep these lights turned off. And this is a shot showing San Bernardino Valley taken by Miles Traphagen at Wildlands Network. The top image on this slide shows night lighting around the Naco area in 2019. And Naco is one of those places where the border lights have been turned on. And you can see the urban lights at Naco itself in the center. And then right along the border, a few kilometers in each direction, the border lights are turned on. And you see this extend in a perfectly horizontal line along the US-Mexico border. And what's important to point out is, even though the lights are designed just to light the road that parallels the wall, that the effects of that light extend north and south because it radiates out. And so the lights affect habitat and wildlife in a much greater footprint than what's perhaps immediately visible if we were to be under the lights ourselves. And in 2020, while they were doing construction, many of the crews worked through the nights and had lights, worked through the night and had lights to assist their construction. And this satellite imagery actually picks that up. And so we can see those two circles that show on the left side of those screen, sort of an illustration of what it might look like if the lights are turned on, where that line from Naco would extend out and completely block or create a nocturnal barrier of light along the entire US-Mexico border. Thankfully, those lights in that construction, with the end of that construction, those lights to the west of Naco have gone away. But it is a little bit of an illustration of what it might look like in the future. And we can kind of envision that by drawing the solid yellow line across the border. If those lights are turned on, it could reach a point where not only is there a physical barrier across much of this area, there would be a lighted barrier at night, which would extend the influence of the wall tremendously. Indeed, if you imagine looking up at this light, which is turned off, and we see these wonderful stars, if that light was turned on, as we've all experienced looking up past our porch lights or past our phone lights or past a light of a house, you can't really see the stars. So if this light was turned on, we would lose an aesthetic value, as well as there would be a tremendous impact on the wildlife and the habitats. And so Sky Island, what we are doing about this is we are collecting nocturnal measurements of the sky conditions all along the border from Nogales to Douglas. We've already collected. And this map shows a bunch of locations where we have already collected sky measurements, with the darker circles indicating darker night skies, and then the lighter yellow and orange circles indicating where there is a little bit more night brightness. And we're using these data paired with our species occurrence data to advocate for keeping this area unlit and for spreading communicating the importance of dark skies for wildlife. And this year we will be continuing those measurements from Douglas all the way to the New Mexico border so that we can understand and have data on the conditions of the night skies before any lighting decisions are made, and continue to advocate for policies around the border that do not include turning on those lights, because the impacts on wildlife may be severe. And this is the most exciting part of the talk, perhaps. How can you all help? How can you help us with this effort to document night sky conditions around our beautiful area of the Sky Islands in both the US and in Mexico, and so that we can more effectively advocate for sound environmental and wildlife policies near the border? And to do that, it's really quite simple. We're taking advantage, or we're using Globe at Night, which is an international citizen science campaign to spread awareness around the issues of light pollution and night and human lights at night, and the constellation Pegasus, which we'll get into a little bit further in the next couple slides. But basically, we will ask all of you to step outside, look up at the night sky, find Pegasus, and take a few simple measurements and submit that to Globe at Night. And we'll be able to pair that with data we're collecting and have already collected to have a more complete picture of the night sky conditions throughout the Sky Island region. And again, this is another fantastic shot by Sergio. But as I mentioned, really quick and easy, we're gonna go outside from the 17th, so yesterday, to next week, Wednesday, the 26th of October, between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. There's an application that you can navigate to on your phone. This is a website, not a phone app. So we would navigate to globeatnight.com/web app on our phones. Give time for your eyes to adjust. As we all know, when we step right outside from seeing a bright light, it's really hard to see. We'll locate the constellation Pegasus, and then through that web app, you'll take some simple records and submit it to Globe at Night, and Sky Island will access these data and use it to learn more about the conditions of the night sky in the Sky Island region. Over the next few slides, I'll walk us through the specifics of the process, or specifics of using this application, and I'm going to put that how to find this Globe at Night/web app on every page. But if anyone has issues, we can put it in the Zoom chat as well. So this is what the application looks like on your phone. You'll navigate to it by finding Globe at Night/web app, or globeatnight.org/web app. And I want to point out that circle in red is the nighttime version, and on the next slide is a demonstration of what that looks like. It's a red, and it changes the color palette. Red light affects our night vision less than white light, so your eyes will not be quite as affected by your phone screen. So I encourage you all, as you're outside looking at the night sky, to switch to the nighttime version for the duration of your measurements, so that your eyes are not as affected and you can more accurately assess the conditions of the night sky. For our presentation, I'm going to switch back to the daytime version, as it's a little bit easier on the eyes in this setting. But the first step is just to record the date and time. It's really simple. Enter the date you're taking these measurements and the time of those measurements. The next step is to note the location. Where are you taking these measurements? And that is a couple ways you can do that. You can enter coordinates and hit in this search bar next to map it. So enter coordinates and click map it, and this map will center on your coordinates. Or you can enter a town, a cross street, or an address and click map it, and the application will automatically zoom in on your location. And you can verify that it did it correctly by both looking at the map and then also seeing down here where it should autofill your country and state. In the US, here we are in Arizona. In Mexico, it'll center on your state and the country of Mexico. So once you have your location, the next step is, I'm skipping ahead, but that's because I think this is something you should do first. You want to note the condition of the night from a weather perspective. Note whether or not it's clear, if there are some clouds in the sky. And Globe at Night recommends that we do not take measurements if it's more than about half or 50% cloudy, as it just hinders your ability to both see the constellation Pegasus, and also it changes the way lights from further away can reflect on the clouds and change your perception of the night sky. So it's listed as a fourth step. I think it's something you should do right when you get out there while your eyes adjust. Note the conditions of the night sky, how many clouds are present. You can also enter any notes as far as wind or weather, rain, anything else you think might be helpful, but really just go ahead and click one of those 4 options, clear to more than 0.5%, more than 50% cloudy. And again, if it is more than 50% cloudy, perhaps try to take it on another day. Now, the final part is to use these charts of sky brightness, we'll say, to pick or navigate through the 7 options to pick the chart that best matches what you're seeing at your location. So there are 7 options that reflect different brightness levels of the night sky, from what is, for some of us, might be the case where the night sky is there is enough light pollution that all we can see is Jupiter. And that is a really bright planet. So even with quite a lot of human lights coming in around, city lights coming in, you should still be able to see Jupiter. And so if you look up and this is what your night sky looks like, pick this one. Some of us might be lucky enough to be in a place where the night sky looks more like this, where we can see Jupiter as the big star there. And then the Pegasus constellation, which we'll talk about in a little bit, are these 4 stars in the middle. They're 4 brighter stars. But your sky might look like this. So again, there are 7 options, and you can toggle through these charts of night sky conditions and pick the one that best matches the conditions at your location. And then really the next step is quite simple. There is an option if you have a sky quality meter, which is an actual device used to measure the brightness of stars at your location. You don't need this, and most of us do not have a sky quality meter. So you can leave this blank and then go ahead and click submit. And that is all you have to do. It's really, really simple. These data go to a central server where we can access them and use them in our efforts to advocate for sensible policies and advocate for the protection of wildlife and habitat in the Sky Islands. Okay, that's an overview of how to use the Globe at Night application on your phone. Next, I want to talk briefly about where to find the constellation Pegasus. Pegasus is a really large constellation, and for us in Tucson right now, at this between the hours of 8 and 10 o'clock tonight, it'll be to the east, but more or less directly overhead. And it is made up of the most obvious feature of Pegasus is that bright square. In fact, it's called the Great Square, an asterism. It's known as the Great Square, and that is those 4 really bright stars in the middle of your screen, and that's the easiest part of the constellation to identify. And so you can go outside. The constellation is currently really close to Jupiter. It's just a little bit above Jupiter. But another way to find Pegasus is to use a mobile app. There are a number of mobile apps that help you find stars. And that is one that we recommend is Skyview Lite, which is a free application you can download on both Android or Apple phones. And you can actually use the phone. It accesses your camera and you can point it at your night sky And as you see stars, planets, and constellations, the application names them and shows you what they are. So you can fairly easily locate Pegasus just looking through the screen. The application also has a search function, which is really quite nice. And you type in the name of either Pegasus or one of the 4 stars, and it pops up with a little arrow on the screen and directs you until you're facing that star, and that star is highlighted on your screen. It's a very powerful tool, fun for stargazing in general, but for finding the constellation for these measurements, it's particularly helpful. And I have listed here, you can search in that application for either the constellation Pegasus or one of those 4 stars that make up the Great Square, that is Sheet, Alpheratz, Markab, and Algenib. Search for any of these in your Skyview Light app or another stargazing app, and your phone should direct you till you're looking directly at that constellation. And to conclude, I'll just remind everyone that the optimal window for collecting these measurements is between yesterday and next week, Wednesday, between the hours of 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. So please help us collect these night sky measurements, and we can populate this map. This map actually shows measurements that have already been collected in the Tucson area for this year, 2022. There's a few so far, but let's get some more on this map. And the data that you help us collect, kind of scattered throughout the Sky Island region in both Arizona and Mexico, coupled with our data that we collect right along the border roads and our wildlife occurrence data, will be very powerful tools to not only advocate for keeping the border and our wild areas as dark as possible, but also just advocating for sensible policies around the border that allow for corridors and movement corridors, and the protection of habitats and wildlife. So thank you. We'll open it up to questions. We can go through anything from the impacts of wildlife or the impacts of light on wildlife, or how to collect the measurements, how to access the app. Any questions you might have, please send us them either by putting your question in the chat or raising your hand or just turning on your microphone. And I'll note too that Emily has placed in the chat, our Zoom chat, links to both the Globe at Night web app, which is where you collect the measurements on your phone, and also a YouTube video, which can be really helpful as it describes not only the mythology surrounding the constellation Pegasus, but also where and how to find it in the night sky. It's a short video. There's about 1 minute. It's like 9 minute long. But if you look from roughly the 2nd minute to the 3rd minute, that's where it really talks about how to find the constellation.
Eamon, I was wondering if maybe you could share a little bit about the impacts of lighting even far in the distance for migratory birds. I know this is a really important migratory bird corridor, many of them in the Sky Island.
Thanks, Emily. So one of the species or groups of species most affected by lights at night and bright night skies are migratory birds. So the songbirds we see in our backyard, from the warblers to the vireos to even the finches that occupy your feeder, and the mourning doves and the white-winged doves, many of these species migrate at night, and they migrate very long distances. And they do so with a number of signals, but one of their main signals is moon and starlight. So these birds, as they're navigating from their wintering grounds in maybe their wintering grounds are here right around the Tucson area, or they're in Central or in South America. So these birds are migrating vast distances. And as they do so at night, they're disoriented by bright city lights, or even just human lights in general. So they estimate that as many from anywhere from 100 to 100 million to 1 billion songbirds die every year from collisions with windows. And many of these collisions happen at night because birds are drawn towards the light, much like insects and moths. We've all heard the adage, like a moth to a flame, as the lights attract insects to flame lights, they also attract birds. So these migratory birds moving through the landscape already face so many hurdles, from climate change to loss of habitat on their wintering grounds to contaminants in their prey, are now dealing with reduced ability to navigate at night. And the consequences of particularly lighting the border wall. If we remember that map that showed night lights, we saw that the area between Nogales and Agua Prieta was really quite dark. And this is part of the Pacific Flyway. So lots of migratory birds move through our area, and they're doing so at night. If we light that border wall, it would create a barrier to these birds, or an opportunity for them to get lost and confused on their already demanding migratory routes.
Thanks, Eamon. There's stuff coming in the chat. One question from Facebook is, what actions can we take to get the government to not turn on these additional lights?
That's a really great question. I think it's reaching out. Well, it's voting in the primaries in the next month, but it's also reaching out to your local legislation and letting them know that it's an issue you care about. I think it's kind of an issue that's floated under the radar as just not something that's been talked about. But I think reaching out to your local legislation and letting them know it's an important issue, and it's important that we keep these lights off, will help spread awareness of this around this issue.
Yeah, great point, Eamon. And we will be, as you've said, we'll use these data as we find out additional ways where we can provide that information to decision makers to help encourage them to change the lighting policy decision at the border in particular. Another question is about taking measurements in urban areas versus rural. Is there value in basically in doing both, or would you compare urban and rural lightscapes?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. If you have the time and the willingness to collect measurements in both locations, we find both very helpful. We have a network of cameras, Photofauna. I'm sure many of you are already participating or are aware of this program, but that is a community-based photo or a camera trapping study where we have cameras throughout the Tucson area, throughout the Sky Island region in both the US and Mexico. And so we have information on the species in both urban and rural areas. And so if we can pair that data with measurements of the night sky, it will help us figure out which species are most dependent on night sky, where areas are within the urban setting that could potentially be dark corridors to help species exist in our urban settings, because many species do exist here. And if there's ways we can minimize that impact by turning off light strategically at night, that could be very important. And these measurements are an important tool to help us make those types of decisions. So yes, measurements in urban and rural settings will be important, and we will make those comparisons and see what we can learn when we compare or when we pair that with our species occurrence data through Photofauna. So yeah, thank you. Great question. Sergio, hay una pregunta de Jalisco, de Sandra. ¿Quieres responder?
Sí, claro que sí. Sí, claro que sí. Sandra, puedes subir tu observación ahí en Globe at Night. De hecho, pues esa información utilizaríamos aquí en México nosotros. Entonces, bienvenida a subir tu observación ahí.
Thanks, Sergio. I see Tucson used to pride itself on being a dark sky city. So and I think we are still, I know that relatively speaking, the night sky map that I showed did show Tucson as quite bright, and it is brighter than the rural areas around. But in comparison to other cities, Tucson does okay. That said, there are ways we could improve. by changing the way streetlights are made, setting hours where they're not on. I know there's a number of intersections where they're left on all night. So Tucson is better than most, but that's not necessarily setting the bar high enough. We could do better as a city. And campaigns like ours spreading awareness about the issues of light pollution for wildlife and humans. The impacts of night lights for today, we focused on wildlife, but there is a growing body of research that shows lights at night affect the circadian rhythms of humans too, and it affects our ability to sleep, and it affects our hormonal levels. And so light pollution is an issue that affects more than just wildlife. So as a city, if we could do better to turn off lights at night, it would benefit us as humans and local wildlife. So we have another question: impacts of night lights on bats. Bats are one of our favorite nocturnal animals. We've all heard stories or grown up with just this awareness of bats at night. In Tucson, we have mini bridges over the Rillito that flood out with several species of bats at night, and it's a scene to behold. Bats forage at night, they hunt insects, they're important for pest control. And the way that lights affect bats can depend a little bit on the type of bat. Some bats are migratory, and just like birds, lights at night negatively impact their ability to navigate and reach their wintering grounds in the winter and returning to their summer grounds in the spring migration. So lights can affect their ability to navigate, or it can change the way they hunt, as many bats use echolocation to find flying insects. Insects are drawn into lights, and so bats will be drawn in. They're more visible to night flying predators, and they can also be just more at risk of coming into contact with humans. And if the lights were on next to structures, it can actually cause collision deaths, just like in birds. Less so, but it can occur. But I'd say the main impact on bats is it affects their ability to hunt, and it affects their ability to move and migrate from their wintering to their summer grounds and vice versa. Hay otra pregunta de Carmen, Sergio.
Sí. She's asking, since when are we doing this study? Do you have the answer?
Well, we have a question from one of our participants in Mexico. It's since when we've been doing this study, and we have been collecting dark sky measurements as an organization since last year, and that's those data I showed along the border. But Globe at Night, the campaign we are using as a repository and as a method for collecting these dark sky measurements, has been going on for a number of years. I believe since 2007, thereabouts. It's been going on for more than a decade, where they've been collecting measurements with this simple method throughout the world. And they have campaigns in both the northern and southern hemisphere. It's a really broad and wide-reaching effort. And so we've been collaborating, or we've been contributing since last year, but it's been going on for many more years.
Y actualmente en México estamos trabajando en la parte de las leyes, las reglamentaciones. Ya tenemos la parte nacional, la parte estatal, ahora sí las municipales, para modificar los reglamentos de construcción y ecología que te regulan el tema de la contaminación lumínica.
All right. Any more questions? Feel free to turn on your mic too if you want to just ask directly. If not, we can, yeah. If not, we'll thank everyone for participating, and encourage everyone to step outside in the next couple of minutes and collect and look for Pegasus. Again, it'll be more or less overhead, a little bit to the east for us here in Tucson. And you'll look for that set of 4 stars known as the Great Square. Let your eyes adjust and take a reading on what the night sky looks like in your area to help us understand the conditions both here in Tucson and throughout the entire region so that we can protect this beautiful place we call home.